This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me on the show today, I have Dr. Lauren Butaric of the University of Florida, recently of the University of Florida. Hello, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Getting accustomed back to the Florida weather.
Wait, are you from Florida originally?
I am from Florida originally, yes.
Okay, so you're not like shocked and appalled. I literally got a phone call from my mom yesterday and she was like, Gabby, it is so hot. I don't know how we are going to live. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it. You have air conditioning.
Yeah, it is very hot lately, but so is Iowa. Iowa got very hot, but it also got very cold.
Yeah.
Which I'm not a fan of. So
yeah, it gets crazy muggy in the summer in the Midwest, which I did not think about. But also in Florida, the winter is it's not really winter per se, but people will wear like puffy jackets. It's like 75 degrees out and people are wearing their parkas. And I go to the beach because 75 degrees to me in San Francisco, that's hot. That's like,
yeah.
You know, and the beach is great in Florida in the winter because there's no one there. I shouldn't say that because now I'm going to go and like the beach is going to be bad.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's ideal. It's crazy too because they warm the pool. The pool that we swim at my folks' house, they warm the pool in the winter. And I'm like, it's hot outside.
Yeah. I need my pool to be at like 90. So.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Bathtub. I want to be in the bathtub in the pool. Yeah.
So hot. Okay, well, I did not bring you here to talk about
the weather,
Florida things. Although that could be its own podcast, I'm sure. But I did ask you here to talk about your research, which is it's all about sinuses, which is cool. Yep. Can you tell us what a sinus is, please?
Yeah. So the sinus just means in anatomy, it's just it's space anywhere in the body. The sinuses that I look at are the paranasal sinuses. So they're the air chambers that surround our nose. And most of us don't really think about the sinuses unless we're sick and your head feels like it's going to implode. Those are your sinuses. I just happen to think about them every day because I'm a huge geek about that kind of stuff.
No, they're super cool. There's, all right, we're going to reach back into my graduate degree. There's 4 sinuses, right?
Correct.
You have your frontal, your ethmoid, your maxillary, and your sphenoid.
Correct. Yes. They're all named basically for the bones that they're housed in, although it's actually the openings within the bones that are going to be communicating with the nasal cavity for what they're named in. But in humans, it all corresponds to the bones that they're found in. Yeah.
And if you would like to kind of experience your sinuses, if you don't currently have any sinus pressure, which if you do, we probably don't want to do this. A chiropractor told me once that you can kind of feel the difference actually if you tap over where your sinuses are. So if you go to your forehead and you kind of find your eyebrow, if you have an eyebrow, and you tap right over it, you can feel it feels like a little bit hollow. And then if you tap like right at the top of your forehead, like the difference in your head feels different. And that's because there's air behind there. Or you can also do it on your maxillary, which is like right under. If you've got eye bags like I do, because I'm an old lady, like right under your eye bags, you can feel it right there.
Right. Yeah. And it might work better on the maxillary sinus because it is the largest of the sinuses. And one of the things that we can talk about that I would love to geek out about is the frontal sinus is really variable. Some of us don't even have one. So if you're tapping above your eyes and you're not seeing a difference or feeling a difference, I should say, it might be because maybe your sinus is really small or you don't have one there.
That is actually on my list. I learned about this. I thought that was wild. I hadn't. Let's talk about it now.
Okay.
Wait, no. First, we should discuss why are there sinuses? Like what purpose do they serve? Why do we have holes of air in our heads?
Oh, that's the age-old question. The real answer is that we don't really know. It's primarily related to evolutionary baggage. So we know a number of mammals have these sinuses. We see them in archosaurs. Dinosaurs have these sinuses. Basically, sinuses around our nasal cavity, those paranasal sinuses form when there is mucosa near like lungs and respiratory mucosa. It just encroaches on the growing bone around it. So we have them because it's part of our evolutionary history. What do they do now? There's a lot of different functions that don't necessarily help keep us alive per se, which is why you can not have a sinus like your frontal sinus and you're going to be 100% fine. What they do now, though, is they can add resonance to your voice. So singers who are really good, they can kind of harness those hollows of the head to kind of help with their singing. Again, not a functional adaptation, but it's something that you can use for that. They produce, especially the maxillary sinus, produces nitric oxide, which is really important in immunology for your health. It also helps us breathe better. They do, some people say they lighten the skull for balance. Again, probably not a big deal. And probably doesn't do that much for us, but that's one thing that they could be a part of. And I don't know, they give me something to study. So I guess that's one of their functions too.
Perfect. Perfection. No, okay. Yes, that is. I do think honestly, yes, I would not object to them being placed solely in the head for you to study. I was reading that that sinuses have like mucus in them normally. Like it's not just when you have a sinus infection or sinusitis. Like there is mucus in there.
Yes, yeah. So the sinuses are lined by very similar mucosa that lines our nasal cavity, and you have mucus in our nasal cavity, which we all know because we all deal with snot every day. And that same stuff is really in our sinuses. And it helps kind of lubricate the area. It helps with breathing, at least in the nasal cavity a little bit. In the sinuses, it's kind of there because it's there. And it's usually not a problem as long as it's not too much mucus. Where it becomes a problem is when we get an accumulation of that mucus, and then it just kind of sits there. It stays stagnant. It's not draining. That's when we get a lot of infections that can develop.
Yeah. And then there's certain people that, so one of the studies that you did looked at like sinus shape and like spacing, and it showed that certain people with certain shapes are much more prone to getting sinus infections.
Yeah, and so that's the hypothesis. So in that study, what we looked at was the maxillary sinus, so that big airspace that's underneath, so just below your orbits. And that sinus is actually pretty unique in that not only is it the largest sinus, but the opening, the connection to the nasal cavity is actually towards its roof, whereas all the other sinuses kind of drain by gravity. The maxillary sinus doesn't drain by gravity unless you're upside down all day, right? And then the other sinuses will get messed up. But what we were looking at is the hypothesis that different individuals will have a different location of where that opening is. So in some individuals, that sinus is really tall, and so that opening is even further up relative to the rest of individuals. What we didn't do, unfortunately, is be able to connect that to individuals who actually have sinus problems. So that would be a really interesting study moving forward, and something that I hope to look at now that I'm in a bigger university, where I can look at, okay, these individuals are suffering from sinus problems, that they have a lot of maxillary sinusitis. What do the sinuses actually look like? Are they the taller sinuses? Are they the sinuses where that opening is really high, so it's harder to clear out the mucus? And of course, the anatomy of the sinus is not the only thing that's really affecting sinusitis. You have, your nervous system, blood vessels in there. If those are not functioning properly from a physiological standpoint, that can be an issue too. And your environment, if you're living in a dusty area, if you're living in areas where you don't breathe really good quality air, that's going to be affecting it too. If you don't have access to healthcare, that's going to be affecting things too. So it's not just anatomy, but anatomy can be one piece of the puzzle.
I have gotten a sinus infection every time I've gone to China.
Do you think it's
super polluted? If you, when you blow your nose, not all the time, but if you're in certain places in China, when you blow your nose, your snot comes out black, which is
so in the urban areas primarily, I would think, in the big cities.
Yeah. It's funny because I used to work on farms and I used to blow my nose and it would come out, it's a good healthy brown color from all the dirt. This is what everyone who woke up and is driving to work, that's what the people want to hear about, is this color of my snot.
Yeah, snot. Snot ladies talking about snot.
um, no, that's really, really interesting. So if they're not draining by gravity, that means like it has to get up and out of that hole, and presumably it's like going down your throat or.
Yes. So I was just having this conversation with some third-year med students. For the sinus to get that stuff out, they have these little cilia, which are little hair-like projections on the mucosa. So as long as those are functioning properly, they should get them out. But ultimately, any snot that does not come out the front of your nose is going to go somewhere, going to go down your nose, and ultimately we all just eat our snot. I mean, we swallow our snot basically, as long as if the stuff that's not coming out of our nose.
I have never really thought about sinuses. Like when I have looked at sinuses historically in the past, it's been in skulls. So it's just bone. So like to me, until I started reading your papers, I had never thought about the sinuses as like being covered in living tissue and there being stuff. I was just under the mistaken impression that it was just holes in your head and then sometimes they got filled with snot. But like it never occurred to me to be like, why? Why snot?
Yeah.
But so for anyone who is doing their like their intro to biological anthropology and you've got a skull and you're looking at it, like you can look into some of the openings depending on what's going on with the skull, and like that there's stuff in there when the person's alive.
And I think that's actually a really important part, especially for those who are in biological anthropology or even related topics like paleontology, where you're looking at bones and skeletons and fossils. Anything in the skeleton is shaped the way it is because soft tissue made it that way. Any hole that you're looking at usually has nerves or blood vessels running through it, muscles attached to those bumps and projections that we see on the rest of our like limbs, their arms and the legs. And so the spaces in our head are also either a room for something like our orbits or rooms for our eyeballs, whereas there are spaces of our paranasal air sinuses mainly filled with air, but lined with that mucosa. So there's always soft tissue involved.
Yeah. It's really cool. There's people have a lot of foramen, which
foramina,
yes, little holes. For a single one is a foramen, is a little hole. Correct. Or foramina, which is multiple. We're going to learn a little bit of Latin today too. But like you have all these little foramina in your bones that are just the holes for nerves and blood vessels to shoot through, which is really cool. Like you wouldn't think of like that, like your bone having little hallways for stuff like that, but it does. Like it's like that. Bones are so cool.
I agree.
The smartest thing I've ever said. Okay, so we have these sinuses, they're draining. Sometimes they get filled up. Real gross. Anyone who has experienced that, it's really terrible. As you kind of mentioned earlier, sinuses can vary significantly from person to person. Here's a question that's easy to ask and hard to answer. Why do sinuses vary so much?
That is a great question. And there's not a lot of really good answers for those people who really want legit answers. They vary so much because likely growth and development. So as I mentioned, these sinuses are forming usually when you have mucosa where you have spaces next to respiratory mucosa. So a respiratory mucosa is surrounding inside our nasal cavity. So you get outpouchings of it into bone. And that's standard process. We see something similar in birds. It's slightly different, but in birds, a lot of their bones are pneumatized. So that's a really fancy word for just aerated, being full of holes. And it has to do with those bones being next to their really crazy lung system. Same idea, much simpler in humans. The question is not why they're growing, is why do they stop growing? Because the idea is that they're opportunistic pneumatizing spaces, which just means that these sinuses are going to aerate the bones as much as they can when they're there. Once they reach the edge of the bone, they're going to stop. And so that's kind of been shown to be pretty normal, seems to be kind of the key. When do they stop? Why do they stop? Why aren't our entire skull, for example, going to be filled with more spaces? And why is there variation where some people get a frontal sinus above their eyes, some people don't? Same thing with their sphenoid sinus. A lot of people don't get the sphenoid sinus. Those questions we don't have answers for.
Yeah, I realized we didn't tell people where the sphenoid and ethmoid sinuses are, but so you've got your frontal sinuses above your eyebrows, and then if you kind of like trace a line from your eyebrow down your nose, that's where your ethmoid sinus is.
Yeah, behind your nose, like in the roof of your nose, behind your eye, like in between your eyes and on the top of your nose.
Right. Yes. And then if you keep going down, you have your maxillary, and then basically behind your eyeballs, you've got your sphenoid.
Basically, yeah. So in between, but behind the eyeballs. Yeah.
Back.
So kind of your brain is sitting on top of your sphenoid sinus.
Yeah.
Parts of your brain.
Yeah. Is that the one that looks like a butterfly?
So the sphenoid bone looks like a bat to me.
Oh, okay.
So I guess a bat could look like a butterfly, depending on which way you want to go.
Yep. Okay. All right. I haven't done anatomy in a long time. I'm honestly very pleased with myself with how much I remember.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I live for compliments. Okay. So because there is variation, that means that you can use sinuses for different things. So you can use them in forensic context.
Yeah. And so that was a big project that I just recently started wrapping up, is looking at the frontal sinus in relation to positive identification. And I was doing this with my colleague at Des Moines University, Dr. Heather Garvin, who is a board certified forensic anthropologist. I'm the sinus nerd. She's the one who helped direct it this is what we need to think about as forensic anthropologists. So it was a really great collaboration. And basically, the frontal sinus is so variable, even identical twins have different shaped sinuses.
That is
which
so
is crazy.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And it has to do something with environmental growth and development, or just stochastic processes. It just might be that kind of, if you think about dropping oil in water, the oil is going to spread differently. It could be like just that it's just different because it's different. There might not be something really causing it, which drives me crazy because I want a reason for everything. But setting that aside, you can use it. They call it the fingerprint of the skull. And so let's say there's a skeleton that was found in the woods, missing the teeth. So we can't really do dental identification, missing the skin. So can't use fingerprints. DNA takes a really long time and is really expensive. If you think that the individual, if you have an idea of who they might be, like let's say it's this individual who went missing 5 years ago, around the same time frame, around the same build. Let's see if they have an X-ray or a CT scan of their head from when they were alive, so antemortem. If you take an X-ray or a CT scan of the skull, you can actually compare them and look at the frontal sinuses. Are they the same? Are they not the same? And often it's really easy to tell the difference between them, as long as the images that you have are oriented similarly. So we're not going to take an image of the skull looking to the left and up, where the clinical image that was taken when they were alive is looking a different way. So you want to orient them as much as you can. But as long as the sinuses, they can be quite different from each other, it can be an easy yes or no. The problem comes in with sometimes our sinuses, even though they all vary, sometimes they could vary similarly, right? Especially if you have a really small sinus that doesn't have a lot of arcade, so it's not as bubbly as other sinuses. It's not as large as other sinuses. They're just these small little kind of smooth balloons above your eyes. That can be a little bit difficult. But what's really cool is one of the papers that we are working on right now that's about to go in for review, hopefully soon. We have a couple more things to do on it, is individuals with hardly any experience in anatomy, hardly any experience looking at radiographs, have a relatively good chance of figuring out, is this person the same person or not? Does the sinus belong to the same person? Looking at side-by-side radiographic images. Training definitely helps if you have individuals who are board certified forensic anthropologists, radiologists, forensic odontologists also, so individuals who really look at the dentition. So used to looking at radiographs, though, they have an almost pretty much a 100% rate, even with sinuses that are kind of difficult to tell the difference between whether they're the same individual or not. So it looks really good with just easy visual assessment.
So this is really cool. And I was going through, first of all, you are a very prolific writer. So I limited myself to like the last 4 years of your work because I was like, I can't, there's so much to read, which is wonderful. That's very good for you. But I thought it was really cool that you had some articles like in the forensic context looking at just setting standards for evaluating sinuses. Like you have to make sure that things are in the same orientation, and like it is possible to do it when they're like, if the orientation is slightly off, but like you have to be careful about X, Y, and Z. That's like the kind of stuff that is not sexy. Like you're never going to end up on the Yahoo homepage. I don't know if young people still go to like internet homepages, but you know what I mean? Like you're never,
yeah.
But it's like such important science, and it's so cool and it's so foundational. I was very thrilled when I saw that.
Yeah, and that's what the grant, it was a National Institute of Justice grant. That's what the grant was doing, is setting these empirical guidelines. And that's not saying that other people haven't looked at that. But what we did is we really used a similar sample and hit all the big points. So at what time during growth and development would we expect the frontal sinus to look one way versus another way? Like what traits develop first in the sinus? And the way I like to describe the frontal sinus for those people who are like, well, what do you mean you're looking at this airspace? It's almost like a cloud. So if you look at clouds, you can see different shaped clouds in the skies. You have some that are more bumpy than others. You have some that are smoother than others, some that are tall and skinny, and some that are short height-wise and long lengthwise. And so sometimes it's easy to tell the difference between those clouds. Sometimes clouds look the same. They look similar. And how do you quantify that difference? How do you quantify the similarity? Is kind of just like trying to measure clouds, basically.
So, okay. For forensic science, the main purpose of forensic science for the most part is identification of some kind. So in what ways can you use sinuses to make forensic identification? So typically for listeners who are kind of new to the show, the things that forensic scientists are going to look at are sex, age, ancestry, which is a way of saying where your folks came from. So like, are you of African descent, or are you of European descent? Sometimes you can do height. I can't imagine you do height from sinuses.
Yeah, not so much.
Crazy. But there's like kind of just a variety of things that you can look at that when you put it all together, it can help give you an ID. So
yes.
For sinuses, what are the things that you can kind of use sinuses to help determine?
So one of the good things about sinuses, or the frontal sinus, is that it is so individualistic, as I talked about. It's one of the few things that you can use to support or negate an identification. Is there supporting evidence that this skull belongs to this missing individual or not? So the frontal sinus can do that. There's also some size differences in the sinuses. So if you're looking at individuals sex-wise, males versus females, or just individuals who have higher testosterone levels, their cranium is going to be bigger, their skull is going to be larger. So the sinuses are more likely going to be larger as well. So I haven't been part of them, but there are some good studies looking at determining male versus female sex based on the size of the maxillary sinus or the size of the frontal sinus, because those will vary in absolute size. So you can use that. Ancestry, a little bit. We do know that the nasal cavity, so basically our nose holes, the part of the nose that's inside our skull, is going to be different based on our ancestry. If our ancestry is from hot, wet climates, so like West Africa and equatorial areas, versus cold, dry climates like the Alaskan Inuits, for example. Very different shapes and different sizes in the nasal cavity, which then affects the size and shape of the sinuses that surround them. We also know that there are some ancestral differences in whether or not you have a frontal sinus. So individuals, if there's ancestry, Alaskan Inuits or Oceania, like Polynesians, they are going to more likely not have a sinus, or a frontal sinus is going to be very, very small or hypoplastic, so underdeveloped is the fancy term for that. So a little bit in ancestry, not so much. Ancestry is really the hardest one to pinpoint. Yeah, so
it always is.
Those are some things.
And also, like, I think the other thing is, as people mix more, because like the reason some of these variations can come to be in existence is because populations were separate. as people mix more, it becomes
yeah.
harder and harder and harder.
Yes.
Which is great. We should be a melting pot, but like it does make like some of these features, like I think the one that cracks me up is when people are like Latino. I'm like, that is not really, that is an ethnic group, and there's a lot of people in that pot. But yes, so and the reason you're like, yes, you can use these sinuses for like objective identification, and then here's some things that like if you're like looking at a skull, you're like, yeah, like these things correlate, so it's like good to know. And that's because not everyone has imaging of their heads available.
Right. And that's really the only way that you see these structures is with X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. You can kind of see structures with ultrasound, although not really like the bony formations of them, but CT scans, X-rays, MRIs are going to be the best ways. CBCT scans at the dental office would work as well for some of the sinuses.
Yes. Yeah. As someone who has had her fair share of concussions in her life and has imaging for most of them, if I ever go missing, you'll be able to identify me by my sinuses. Let the police know. Cool. Okay. So actually, I wanted to ask you something about what you were saying about nasal cavity structure, because this is another area that you study. So the environment that your ancestors were in, that can have an effect on your nasal cavity and like what that looks like what and why.
Yeah, so our noses are going to be our noses do so much. One of the things that it does, obviously, though, is helps us breathe. And one of the things that we don't often think about, especially me being in Florida again, is that when we're breathing in air, we need that air to be around room temperature. You don't want to be breathing in very cold, very dry air. And so individuals who live or who have ancestry of individuals who lived in very cold, dry areas, what you'll see is that their nasal cavities are taller, so height-wise taller, and more narrow breath-wise, so width-wise. Individuals who have ancestry from very hot, humid climates are going to have shorter and wider noses. The shorter, wider noses are better for breathing because you can breathe more air in at a time, and it's not as energetically costly. So you're just breathing in, you don't have issues. There's not like a nasal septum deviation problem that's making it hard to breathe through a tiny little airspace. However, that smaller airspace, those taller and more narrow nasal cavities, are really important for adding air turbulence, so making air be more chaotic. That is important in cold, dry climates because it makes that air hit that respiratory mucosa and the blood vessels that line our nasal cavity, which is going to help warm and humidify that air. So having that turbulence in our air, getting warmed and humidified before we breathe it in, makes it a lot nicer for our lung tissue. Individuals who don't have that, where you're breathing in cold, dry air that's not warmed and humidified, are going to have more respiratory issues, more respiratory distress, and this becomes very problematic, especially in children. And so we see those differences, especially at the extremes, very cold, dry, very hot, wet. And it's not necessarily more about the temperature. A lot of it is about the dryness. So hot, dry, you have certain different shaped nasal cavities compared to hot, wet as well.
Yeah, I think for people that have been on airplanes, for example, and it's like extremely dry, like imagine that, but you're outside all the time.
All the time. And although not as much research has been done on it, it's also a lot of the particulates in the air. You talked a little bit about pollution, but also, pollen and dust and all of that can be affected as well. It's just there hasn't been, at least with me, I haven't been part of those studies. And I think just overall, there's not as much studies about that.
So one of the tools that you use a lot are these scanning tools to like look inside people's skulls. And I think when a lot of people think about physical anthropology, they think about holding like a femur in their hands and just like looking at it either macroscopically or like maybe someone takes like a sliver of bone and they're looking at it under a scanning electron microscope or something like that. But like you are using these scanning technologies to kind of peer into the bone. Like, how is that like, I don't know if there's a real question here. I think I might just be saying things. Is there something you want to say about scanning technology?
I can talk a little bit about it and you can see how it fits in, if it fits in.
Yeah, do it.
So a lot of the samples that I've had used in the past have been museum crania. So collections that are in the museum's archives. And museums don't really like it when you go in and just break open skulls to look at these openings, these spaces. And it's also very disrespectful for the individuals where these skeletal materials have come from, because you have to remember that, when you're looking at bones, whatever bone it is someone who was a living individual. And so CT scanning is a really good way that you can access those inside spaces that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. What's also really good about CT scanning is then you get this archived image that you can share for next generation research, as long as there are appropriate questions being asked. We don't just want to CT scan everything and have it just be there because people think it's cool to look at skulls and things like that. Again, is respecting the individuals where these crania or skeletal material have come from. And so one of the things that I've also really learned from that is applying those dry crania CT scans of just bone and trying to get more into the clinical nature of things. So CT imaging is really popular in clinical research, right? And just in clinics in particular to see these inside structures. And so what's really cool is it helps for me form a connection between working on the, just the skeleton from an anthropological point of view, using similar methods imaging wise that we see in living populations, and kind of makes that transition into healthcare and understanding why these structures are important health wise. That's kind of where I'm seeing that going. And also it's really useful for med students. So I do a lot of research with med students who are looking, and also like PhD students who are interested in going into healthcare. And so being able to have them as part of the study, they might not be interested in the evolution of human form, but they're interested in learning how to use radiographic imaging. So a lot of the students that I've worked with actually have gone on in residencies in radiology or in ENT, ear, nose, and throat, and things like that. So that becomes useful.
Does that mean that you can use like just radiographic collections to do research?
Yeah. And so the radiographic collections, there are a couple that are available. I used it in that forensic grant. So one of the collections that I've used specifically for that forensic grant is the AAOF, so the American Association of Orthodontists Foundation. It's their legacy collection, which are x-rays of individuals that were taken, I think, all the way back in the 50s and 60s, and they're longitudinal x-rays, meaning that individuals who they had an x-ray, at age 2, age 3, age 4 of the same individual. So you can learn a lot about the growth and development of these radiographic collections that have been out there for a very long time. And that is actually available online. Anyone can go take a look at that.
See, that's really cool. The other thing that I want to touch on, because I haven't talked about it in a really long time, long-time listeners will know what is coming. Math. You do math to do your job.
I do statistics, which is arithmetic. I still remember crying over arithmetic problems in middle school. I cried over math more than boys in middle school and high school. Statistics is a little bit of a different beast. So yes, there's a lot of statistics to do, depending on what one is looking at.
Yes. I haven't harped on it in a while, but it's one of those things where if you're like really serious about going into academia, chances are you will need to know some math. So
yeah,
prepare yourself. If you do, you can do really cool sinus studies or something else.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so many different statistical analyses out there. So don't get overwhelmed to learn all the things. You take your basic statistics course to understand probabilities. And then I highly recommend, for those of you who are still in school and will maybe eventually be doing this research of anything of any kind, learn R, the statistical program R. Right now, it's the big pain in my butt. Or get a really good friend who you can collaborate with the rest of your life who knows R coding. It's a lot of program coding, but it's important, and I'm trying to get better at using it.
Yeah, I got really lucky because I fell into this like weird hole in grad school in terms of time where they weren't teaching R, they were using SPSS. And
I still use SPSS, so I'll use that for a lot. But
I love SPSS. So SPSS, for listeners, it's basically a GUI, so something that has like icons and like drop down menus and stuff that you can like interact with to be like, hey, I want you to do this analysis on this data set. So instead of like using programming language, you can just be like, it's just a little bit nicer of a user experience. But there's some things that are a lot easier to do with R than it is with SPSS. But when I was in grad school, they weren't teaching R. It was just SPSS. And so I like kind of escaped the programming time of but just like I think a year or two, to be 100% honest with you.
Yeah. If you have those courses available, use them. If you have the time available, do it.
Take them.
It'll serve you in the long time.
And I will say that once you understand the basic statistics, like what you can do with SPSS and R is so amazing. I used to like sit there and doing my statistics homework and think about poor grad students in the past who would have hundreds of samples and they'd have to do all of this by hand. Like that is a true horror to me.
Yeah. Same thing with not being able to like look up. I mean, I did this because not to age myself, I'm not old, but I did, kind of do a lot of research papers and stuff before Google existed and Google Scholar. I like to call it Scoogle. So before Scoogle existed. And I was like, how did I do that? And it was fine. I did it.
It was fine. Yeah.
It is so much nicer now.
Yeah. You would look in a book.
Yeah.
You couldn't check out reference books. So I would photocopy pages and take them home with me. Yeah, it's like a whole different life. Like do people still have encyclopedias in libraries? They must.
And some, yes. When libraries still exist, yes. But yeah, that's a whole other podcast that would be interesting, is the revitalization of library use. So
I know, it's kind of crazy. And also librarians are like the most punk people I know. Like they're so hardcore, all of them.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Okay, but we're not here to talk about that. I did just want to put in a little plug for math. While I had a captive audience, maybe they've all fallen off by now. I don't know. I hope not. But yes. Okay. So you mentioned that you are an anthropologist in a medical school. What is that like? Like, what does that process look like? Is it hard? Is it fun? Tell me a little bit about your life and your path, so that why you ended up at a med school.
Yeah, so all of my degrees are actually in anthropology. I did undergrad, I did my master's, and I did my PhD in anthropology with the specialization of biological anthropology. And as I mentioned kind of before, is our skeletons are shaped the way they are because of the soft tissue structures that form them. And it's really important to understand those soft tissue structures. And I had the benefit of being in universities that had access to gross anatomy. So they had either med schools or allied health programs that had a gross anatomy course that I could take as a biological anthropology student, which is not everywhere. But I took a lot of those courses. I learned a lot about gross anatomy, and actually come time for the job market, I was applying to anthropology jobs. I was applying to anatomy positions, usually in med schools. The anthropology departments didn't really care that much about me, to be honest. I've gotten over that rejection. It's all right. But the colleges of medicine, the anatomy programs were really interested in my experience in not only taking gross anatomy courses, but being a teaching assistant for them. And so for anyone, especially those biological anthropologists out there that are interested in maybe diversifying their portfolio about like, how am I going to get a job when I get out with your PhDs or even your masters, take an anatomy course if you can. Try to be a TA in anatomy course if you can. And that would really open up a lot of what you can do. We do see that there is a dearth in anatomy educators. So Natalie Langley and I actually had a publication a couple of years ago talking about how one of the sources that you can start filling these anatomy positions is through anthropology departments and paleontology departments. Again, because we have to know the anatomy to understand the skeleton, right? And so it is important. And so I highly recommend getting that experience. And again, it can diversify your opportunities. And it's also really cool because it opens up unique new doors in terms of research. So as a biological anthropologist, I've always been concerned and interested in how we vary and why we vary. And now being part of med schools, I can take that question the step further and be like, okay, why should we care that we vary? We talked about it from a forensic standpoint, but going to that clinical standpoint is going to be is my new excitement. So kind of seeing how it can change people's lives and get people to really care about all those holes in our head and snot and things like that.
Yeah, it's the so what that's driving you. That's really cool. And listeners, one of my favorite classes that I took in undergraduate was my anatomy class with a cadaver lab, where we actually got to dissect the cadaver. It was honestly one of the most fulfilling classes I took. It feels like you look back at it and you're like, I was just looking at things, pointing at them and saying, this is a liver or whatever. But it was one of the most interesting, and like seeing how people are put together on the inside, it's wild. And it's such a special gift, that people give students the opportunity to dissect their bodies. It's really an incredible opportunity. If you have one at your university, see if you can get in. You'll probably be in with like heaps of people who are pre-med, but
yep. I highly recommend it. It opens up so many doors, and it teaches you a lot about, humanism as well. Because as you mentioned, that gift of body is so selfless. Our donors are the greatest teachers out there, and just kind of understanding. And I always think, how you treat the dead speaks a lot volume wise to who you are as a person. So looking for that respect, looking for that understanding. And again, it's not for everyone, right? We all view death and we all view that differently, which would be another podcast. But for those of you who want to open up your career opportunities, highly recommend getting at least anatomy experience in there.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I could talk about that class forever. I will say one anecdote, which is that the anatomy lab, it was right next to the pool. Like, I don't know why. This is a really old building, and the anatomy lab was great. It had like extractors and it was state of the art. And then like right next to it was the entrance to the pool. So like at least twice during that semester, someone flung the door open in their bathing suit, and then was confronted with a class full of people like over open bodies.
Oh my goodness, those doors should have been locked. Why were there not badge access or key code entry?
Because it was like 2007.
Yeah, when I took this course back in like 2003 or 4, it was key code at least. It was badge, I think. So
yeah, we definitely had the technology to like have to swipe in to the class anyway, because you had to swipe into buildings. So like in retrospect, maybe they fixed it. William and Mary, I hope you have. But it was spectacularly funny. Anyway, so let's turn to the final 3 questions of the episode. The first question is, if someone wanted to learn more about your field, like the area of research, where is a good place for them to start?
So popular books, there's 2 that I would recommend. One is Breath by James Nestor. It's the big yellow book. Well, it's not that big. It's the yellow book. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and maybe local bookstores might have it as well. But it's really interesting. He goes through a lot of the different process. He does a little bit of evolution of the skull, about why the skull is shaped the way it is, but talks a lot about the mechanisms of breathing and how it affects our everyday life. So I think it's a really fun read. It's part of the jigsaw puzzle, so it's not going to go into a lot of details of like the neuroscience behind breathing, but it helps us think about how we breathe and how to breathe better and the structures involved in breathing, at least some of them. If you're interested, especially those biological anthropologists out there or those individuals who are really interested in evolution, I recommend there is a book by Daniel Lieberman, so Dr. Lieberman. It's called The Evolution of the Human Head. It's a little bit of a thicker book, but it goes through the evolution of the skull from our primate ancestors and into our current, we're still primates. So it goes into how chewing and dietary changes affected our skull, how climate has affected our skull, specifically the nasal cavity. And so that, I think, is a good read as well.
Yeah. That's really funny, because I think I've now had every single Daniel Lieberman book recommended on the show.
He is a prolific writer.
Yeah.
Much more than I am.
Yeah, he certainly is. I did interview him a while back, if listeners want to listen to his episode. Lovely man. Yes. Okay. What are you reading for work right now?
So for work, one of the things, as a biological anthropologist who is working at a college of medicine, I'm more into the variation of the sinuses. How does that affect our health? And so right now I'm really looking into and reading about pediatric airways. So how the airways of children are very differently shaped than us as adults, and why that matters, and how the growth and development of the airways kind of affects things like sleep disorders, sleep apnea, asthma, and things like that. Because that's where I see most of my research now heading towards, is pediatric ailments and how the form and function of the nasal cavity and the airways, the upper airways, kind of play a role in that.
And what are you consuming for fun right now? I used to say, what are you reading? But some people don't read for fun, which is okay.
I'm doing a lot of things for fun right now. I just moved and I've been back in Florida for 2 months. So a lot of it has been painting and dealing with landscaping around the new house, now that I can have more somewhat tropical things that are not going to die off every winter, which is very exciting. So some landscaping, but I do read for fun. I read a lot of fantasy novels, though. I just finished N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth series, which is amazing. I really like Robert Jordan series, which is an epic novel. It was from the 90s. It's one of my, I don't have comfort foods. I have comfort books. And there's like 14 books in the series. And I'm like going through it for like the 4th or 5th time already. And
they're big. They're big. They're so big. I remember picking up like the first book in the Wheel of Time series. And I was like, I think I was like 11 or something. And I was like, this is it. I'm just it's so good. Yeah. It's like a hamburger. It's so fat.
Yeah. And it's one of my comfort series. And anything Stephen King. I'm obsessed with the Stephen King universe, and finding where Pennywise the Clown and the Crimson King is like in all the books. You can kind of find them scattered through a lot of the books. So
that is so funny. I love that. It's also so funny that Robert Jordan is your comfort series, because you're not the first person to tell me that. And I was like the first person who told me that, I was like, okay, like that I could see, yeah. Like, but it's a whole like set of people who like I read the books once and I was like, okay, I don't think I could do it again.
So for me, I listened to a lot of Audible or like audiobooks. Audible wasn't a thing when I wrote my dissertation, but I listened to the Wheel of Time series through all my data collection as a graduate student doing my dissertation work. And so I think it's my comfort zone, because it's like I've listened to them, I've read them, I can kind of go in and out of them. They can be background noise and still just help me kind of calm, relax, and remind myself why I'm here.
I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. I think I don't want to tell you what my comfort series are, because they're so like shitty fantasy. Shitty urban fantasy. There's nothing to be, you know what? No one should ever be ashamed of their reading choices. I think it's great that everyone reads. I love Alona Andrews. I'll just say it loud and proud. She's great. Well, they are great. It's actually a husband and wife team, which I learned recently, which is anyway. But
you'll have to send me that. I don't know anything about this.
Hold on. Yes, listeners, I'm gonna go talk to her privately about Alona Andrews. Everyone else can Google this. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. And if there's any questions, I'm at the University of Florida and living the warm life right now. Very excited.
Yay! Okay, bye, listeners.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.